Next question in that series of EPP questions. Somebody just had the program, ran it for a little while, and had some questions, largely regarding the cardiac adaptations. But also, when we get to the second part of this video, we'll see that sometimes it can be overlap between both central and peripheral adaptations. But the first question is going to begin by understanding that what I have here in this chart is the assumed progression of your heart rate over a maximal effort. So let's say you're going to start running, and then maybe you use a protocol that actually increases the speed or increases the incline, or maybe you're on a woodway force, you start pulling something. The exercise itself probably doesn't matter as long as you're exceeding towards a maximal effort of your central cardiac. This is like over here is you're getting to your maximum heart rate. That's important here to understand. So now, if we start here, we're at 0, so time is here and heart rate is here. So now we start at 0, and when we see this flatten, so for any given maximal effort, your heart rate will go up and up and up and up, and depending on how well you tolerate different environments, which has to do more peripheral adaptations, your heart rate will actually start to plateau. For some people, that is extremely intense. But right here to here, the assumption is that this is somewhere around 80 to 85%, which is very, very typical of the heart rate here for VO2 max. This is threshold. When this is kind of getting to a way that you can create some of your own estimates for your own heart rate zones. That's going to get us to the question of understanding 90 to 60 or maybe some other parameters that our EPP student was asking. So now if this is 80%, just for whatever it's worth, let's say that's 60%. Now we also know from previous video, the aerobic system is running this whole background. Glycolytic systems are going to start in theory here. So your heart rate is going to go up and up and up, and then it will flatten, and then it will skyrocket again should you be able to bring the heat. So right around here is where 90% is going to start, and then here. So how do we actually know what is 100%? Well, you've got 220 minus your age, and you're probably going to be in the ballpark for a lot of people. Other people will be completely off, and it's easy to start to create that solution. But the only way to do it typically is probably have some kind of external motivation during this effort. Most people are not going to be able to go pretty much until you cannot go anymore, where now perhaps there is a safety issue on a treadmill or a climber or something like that. But if somebody's yelling at you, if somebody's screaming at you, if there's some type of incentive to continue, that's really the only way you're going to be able to figure out your maximum heart rate. I can't think of any other way to actually know what it is. And this is also assuming that your peripheral systems for the exercise that you chose are not a limiting factor. This is very, very hard to do. I can suggest to you when using first beat in Canada basketball, every so often I would try to trick the guys, because these are NBA players, high level play. They're not going to do this. If you set up a yo-yo test, they're not going to do it. There's nothing, and it's kind of pointless because it's not going to help us really do anything. We're not going to cut players because they don't beat a fitness test, and we're not, and the test itself, unless we're in a very, very controlled training environment, the data doesn't really help us much. But when we do start to look at what first beat can tell us in terms of other types of data, it resets itself once you reach a new maximum heart rate. So we would do it in warm-up, and we would do sprints, and sometimes I'd be able to pull off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you're going up and down 6 times, 100% sprints. then sometimes we get guys to 201 and 205, and that's very, very believable as a maximal heart rate. But you really don't know until you do it, and you might need to, for this type of event, not so much a warm-up, where we kind of scaled into it. And I also would have known that Jay was going to have something very not full court and something not very intense to run that kind of warm-up. I would never run that warm-up if I knew the next drill, or the drill that was going to start the technical practice, would also be very, very intense. That would be pretty stupid on my part. That's why we always try to communicate with coach, hey, what's your first drill? Or hey, do you have him first or do I have him first? These are types of things you'll see in a lot of sports where you get a practice plan. If coach doesn't give you a practice plan, I don't know how you can really let your warm-up run into what they're doing. But if you do it by yourself, if somebody's yelling and screaming at you, you can have a good chance there. And that's where you'll start to be able to have ideal or close to accurate percentages. Even the most reliable heart rate monitors do have an acceptable level of error. And that leads us to our question, where a very have your cake and eat it too program that probably primarily translates to an eccentric heart adaptation is go as long as you can to 90 and then rest until you get back down to 60. What do you do during rest? Most people do nothing. Sometimes you can coast, but we want to do something that allows the heart rate to get back down so that you can go again. It's really not about what you're doing when you're resting. Maybe it's stretching, maybe it's some mobility work that you're probably not doing with the correct parameters anyway. You're just moving. There's nothing wrong with some kind of active recovery between here and here. But then the question was actually very rudimentary. Charlie, I have seen other types of percentages that are close to what you're describing, where it would be 85 to 65. Well, if you're just using your heart rate monitor or using what the device is telling you, if you hold on, etc., is there really that big of a difference between 85 and 90? In theory, 85% would be the maximum amount of oxygen that you're using. 90, you would be using less oxygen. You would be in a glycolytic energy system to primarily fuel that. Remember, you're just touching it. You're just touching 90% in this particular protocol. Now, you come back down to 60 or 65, even with the acceptable error, I cannot make any suggestion that 60 is any different than 65. Why am I picking 60? Just because. I don't know that there's any type of research or any physiological reason to suggest there's a difference between those two numbers. There should be a physiological difference between 85 and 90 if you're doing a VO2 test. For our purposes of fitness, I don't think so. And I think if you then do 90-60 where there is no definite instruction on how you get to 90, you do have an opportunity to go fast. You do have an opportunity to be somewhat explosive. And if you average out 90 and 60, you're probably going to finish with an eccentric heart adaptation, and you might not even need to do it as long. Also, probably very, very useful for fat loss, as we can get into these very, very high heart rates where you just touch it. There's other protocols that we talk about, EPP. I think you should take a look at it. Maybe if you look at the link right there, maybe you'll start to see it's not only 90-60, it's not only that Netflix program where you watch a movie, maybe you can hang out in the 60s or 70s for that whole period of time, watching a television program, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that you can create those eccentric heart adaptations. I don't think 90-60 is really any difference than 85-65. Okay, so this is the answer to that question. Now you start to see the proximity of these numbers really doing a lot of the same things. So there's your question. Now, when we go on to part 2, I'm going to actually leave this up to start to demonstrate something more peripheral and maybe go over something again from this video.